Hello everyone, Bag here. Arataki Ito's unobtainable physique dream, Mydei, is coming in the second half of version 3.1. In this guide, we'll look at his playstyle, his builds, his teams, and his premium options, so that you can be as informed as possible before you pull for Star Rail's yearly husbando. Timestamps are available for each section for you to jump around with. So with that, let's get into it. Mydei is a 5-star HP scaling imaginary destruction unit who has a complex kit that ends up being played rather simply. He has a lot of things going on with his mechanics as the fight goes on, but the amount of actual decisions that you make with him during a battle are rather low. To explain what I mean, let's go through his kit. Mydei's basic is a standard single target attack, while his skill is a blast attack that consumes 50% of his own HP rather than spending a skill point. Now, why would Mydei want to consume his own HP? Well, Mydei has a charge mechanic separate from his ult bar, where he gets charge for his HP being lost, either by being hit or by being consumed. At base, he gets 1 charge for every 1% of his max HP that he loses, although there are ways to augment this that we'll get into later. This charge serves 2 different purposes. When he reaches 100 charge for the first time, he enters his enhanced state, and after he's in this enhanced state, obtaining an additional 150 charge gets him 1 use of his extra enhanced skill, and we'll get to what both of those things mean in a little bit. This charge has a max cap of 200, meaning that if you get more than 100 or 150 for the respective charges, the overflow up to 200 will be kept for after the charge is consumed. With this in mind, let's actually look at his technique next. Not only does it taunt the enemy for 1 turn, but it also gives him a starting 50 charge for free. So after using his skill that drains 50% of his current HP, he'll have exactly 100 charge, instantly putting him into his enhanced state. What this means is that he can basically immediately get into his enhanced state at the start of the fight, and if you play him correctly, he will never leave the state after entering it. The last part of his kit that we'll talk about before his enhanced state is his ultimate, as it's pretty simple. It does 4 things. It heals Mydei for 20% of his max HP, it gives him a flat 20 charge for free, it lands a guaranteed taunt on all hit enemies for 2 turns, and it does a blast attack against 3 enemies. Nothing else to really say about it for now, so let's move on. So then, what does his enhanced state give him? Well, a lot of things, so let me just list them out here. By entering his enhanced state, he gets healed a decent amount, he gets action advanced by 100%, he gets a boatload of extra max HP, his defense is set to 0, he becomes immune to CC thanks to his second trace, and he becomes functionally immortal. Or rather, for that last one, when he reaches 0 HP in this state, he goes back to his unenhanced state instead of actually dying. And thanks to his first trace, he can resist lethal damage in this enhanced state a total of 3 times. So there are 2 layers of safety nets here to make him feel properly immortal. While he is in this enhanced state, he also gets access to an enhanced skill. Here we get to the most controversial part of his kit by far, as this enhanced skill is used completely automatically. For this attack, it's as if you are forced on auto battle, where the AI decides who to attack for you. This can be influenced by his ultimate, as the AI will prioritize the primary target that you manually target with your ult hit. But otherwise, his turns will go by completely hands off using his enhanced skill, which, by the way, is just another blast attack that consumes his own HP, except this time it just does a bit more damage than his normal skill. Like his normal skill, this also does not use any SP, which means that Mydei never consumes any SP no matter what, which is important for his team building. So then, what was that extra enhanced skill that I mentioned previously? Well, when he gets to 150 charge, he consumes that charge and gets a free turn that goes by automatically. Note that this free turn is not an 100% action advance, but rather an entirely free action, similar to Seele's Resurgence or the Start of a Rap ultimate. This means that this turn does not interrupt his current action value on the action bar, nor does it count down any buffs or debuffs that are currently on him, which makes his buff up time a lot more manageable than it otherwise would be if it worked the other way. In this free turn, he lets forth yet another automatic blast attack, although this time there is no HP being consumed, it's just big damage, no utility. This extra enhanced skill is his largest hit by far, and while it's not the most amount of his total damage, since his enhanced skill will be spammed much more often, it's still a very important part of his kit that you should play around. Playing around it means optimally draining his HP to launch as many of these attacks as you can, while keeping him topped up with sustain in order to make sure that he has HP to consume. Also, you do get a good 10 energy from this attack, which isn't a lot, but it is a free turn, so it's better than nothing, I guess. For the rest of his kit, well, we already went over 2 of his 3 traces while we talked about his enhanced state, but at least we can first look at his minor traces with a very hefty amount of crit damage, some useful HP, and some speed. Why don't they just put the speed into his base speed? I don't know, don't question it. Anyways, his last trace is a rather important one. Mydei gets a stacking buff that depends on his own max HP. For every 100 HP over 4000, Mydei gets 1.2 crit rate, 0.75 extra healing bonus, and the ratio for his charge when being hit by enemies is increased by 2.5%. This buff has a max of an extra 4000 HP, so at 8000 HP, Mydei is looking at 48 crit rate, 30 healing bonus, and 100% extra charge from being hit. So while it is easy to increase his charge by giving him more turns to consume his own HP, this trace makes the more efficient method to always be having him be hit by enemies who deal a lot of damage to him, as they will literally contribute double to his ever important charge. The 48 crit rate is the exact same as Aventurines, so if you have him, you know how important this is when building him. And the extra healing bonus makes sustaining for him not an absolute nightmare, as his very large HP pool would otherwise be very difficult to maintain. Note here that these buffs from this trace are for his HP that he has when entering combat, so in combat buffs, like say his enhanced state, won't count towards this. He needs to have a raw 8000 HP as a baseline to make the most of these buffs. This will be talked about more in the build section, so for now, let's move on. For his general playstyle, Mydei is a typical hypercarry that doesn't really have much to his usual rotation. He does good damage on his turn, his ultimate is a big hit of damage, and every now and then he does a big hit from his extra enhanced skill. The main thing to plan around for him is to have as many turns as possible while still buffing him an appropriate amount. This will be talked about in his team section, but essentially, action advances are his bread and butter, as his turns are how he does any of his damage, and the more he consumes his HP, the more he'll charge the rest of his kit. The main thing to keep in mind is his HP, as his kit slows down a lot when he can't properly consume his HP. Ideally, you are playing Mydei in fights that deal a lot of damage to him, which then means that he wants enough sustain to make that ideal fight realistic for him to actually survive. Thankfully, him not consuming skill points makes it very easy for sustains such as Lorcha or Gallagher to spam their skill on him. His teammates will have a comfortable time playing around his turns with their SP, so it's more so just a struggle if their abilities alone are enough to keep up with the meat grinder that you throw him into. The only other part of his kit that you really need to pay attention to is making sure that his extra enhanced skill isn't being wasted. If you can already kill enemies within a certain cycle without using his extra enhanced skill, then using it on them anyways is a massive DPS loss for the next wave of enemies. Now, due to his auto battle, he doesn't actually have much control over how fast or slow he charges his charge bar. But at the very minimum, you do have control over whether to give him or not give him the flat 20 charge from his ultimate. It's like how you can control Mem through RMC's ultimate giving them 40% charge, except here it's a lot more fickle. His ultimate can also be used to kill or not kill certain enemies before or after they do their attacks on Mydei, which can then also give you a bit more control on Mydei's charge. For example, if you have, say, 120 charge, and your ultimate can finish off the enemy before they charge Mydei to have over 150 charge by attacking him, then ulting them instead and bringing 140 charge into the next wave is a lot better than wasting his ever important extra enhanced skill on enemies that would die in time anyways. Let's next briefly talk about his pros and cons as a unit. For one, his damage is, for now, very respectable. He is able to sit right next to the other top tier carries in the game right now when he is placed in his optimal fight scenario of 3 imaginary weak enemies that are constantly attacking him. The life cycle of a carry is always very finite in Star Rail, but at the very least, his initial showing is pretty dang solid. He also does have pretty legitimate cheap teammate options. Not as cheap as the Herdas, but he's not one of those carries that are entirely reliant on having certain other teammates in order to properly function. He's instead just a typical carry here, where his premium options for sure boost his performance by a lot, but his base performance is still workable in its own right. Finally, if we want to call this a pro, he is also pretty easy to play. His rotations are simple, his SP isn't tight, and sustaining him is really the only thing that requires any active attention, alongside keeping track of his charge in order to properly use it on the correct enemies. If you play Star Rail for the auto battle turn your brain off fun times, then Mydei is basically made for you. For his cons, as we'll get into later, his signature Lycone does have a pretty large impact on his overall damage. So while his teams aren't that strict, and he does have a free to play Lycone option, his signature is slightly more important than the average carries. His auto battle is also a bit debilitating in some fights that require require manual targeting, like for example in the Aventurine boss in Apocalyptic Shadow, or really just most Apocalyptic Shadow fights that require certain enemies to be taken down in a specific order. As future fights get more and more complicated, Mydei might find more and more situations where playing around his auto battle is more trouble than it's worth. And finally, as his arguably largest flaw, his auto battle is also, for many, just not fun to play around, and is generally a turnoff for playing him in the first place. He is very strong in spite of it, but in terms of actually pulling him and using him, you should consider how fun he'll actually be in comparison to other more manually engaging carries. A plug here to say that you should subscribe to here and my Twitch. More of these videos will be the norm from here on out, so if you like what you see here, subscribe so that you don't miss my coverage on future units. Alright, back to the vid. Next, let's talk about how to build Mydei. For his relics, there are some pretty clear-cut options for both of his sets. For the main set, the Scholar set is the general best option, as the extra skill damage after ulting is very synergistic with his kit. You can also use the Longevous set, or any generic 2-piece that doesn't involve attack, but Scholar is a rather large damage boost for him, so getting it for him is highly recommended. For his planer, the new 3.1 set, Bone Collection, is his best set, as not only does it give him a large amount of crit damage, but also the extra HP is important for helping him reach his 8000 HP threshold. Otherwise, Rudolin is a pretty decent alternative for the skill damage that buffs the majority of his damage. For his stats, this is where things get a bit dicey. The main stats to reach on top of the typical 1-to-2 ratio for crit are 8000 HP and any speed threshold you're working towards. So for speed, that means 134 in most -1 speed cases, or no speed if you're running a hyperspeed support like Sparkle. 8000 HP can be worked towards in a lot of different ways, from substats to his Lycon's HP to his set bonuses. Generally, 2 HP main stats makes it easy for him to reach 8k HP, and if you don't have 2 main stats for HP, then you'll look to make up that difference from substats and the Bone Collection set bonus. For those main stats, an HP rope is obvious for him for one, but after that it really depends. As I just said, if you don't care about his speed for his team, HP boots is the obvious end-all solution for this conundrum. Otherwise, while an imaginary damage orb is generally better for him, HP will be more worthwhile if it helps you reach 8000 HP. As a last note, his signature Lycone gives him a lot more damage percent than HP, so there HP is a lot more competitive if you are going for it. Like with most if not all carries, the real answer with the orb is to use whatever has better substats and whatever lets you reach certain thresholds. But if you can make do without the extra HP, then imaginary orb is generally better. Because you can get HP in so many other ways, it is also usually not worth going for an HP body. Like most carries, crit, or more specifically crit damage, is still recommended for him due to his abundance of crit rate. From the 48% from his kit, the 20% from Sunday, and the 10% from Mem. With just Sunday, he has an absolute minimum of 73 crit rate, and that goes to 83 if he also uses RMC. So for Mydei substats, crit damage and HP percent are generally more important to stack up than crit rate, assuming you have a small amount of crit rate to get him into the 90s. This crit rate problem is also a part of why both Longevous and Rudolin might be difficult to use on him, since their extra crit rate have a good chance of being overkill on him without proper substat allocation. So to go over it all, it's crit damage body, it depends on your team for the boots, it depends but probably HP percent unless if you have 8000 HP already, in which case imaginary damage for the orb, and HP rope. Talking more about his Lycones, there are 2 options that you should be going for that are on the opposite ends of cost, either his signature or the free event Lycone from 2.6. A reminder here that you can buy the event Lycones from the Simulated Universe shop, so even if you miss the event, this option will be free for you no matter what. To compare the 2's stats, the event Lycone gives 24% HP and 36% crit damage. Meanwhile, the signature Lycone firstly has much higher base HP, then it gives 18% HP, 60 damage percent, and an extra amount of HP consumption whenever he uses his skill or ultimate. Since this is proportional to his max HP, this is just a flat 6 extra charge per skill or ultimate, which can add up over the course of a fight. So I wouldn't say that this is an Acheron situation with his Lycone, since he does have easily accessible free-to-play alternatives, but this is a case where the damage between his signature and other options is rather large. I'll say right now that his signature is much more worthwhile and of course cheaper than his first Eidolon. So at the very least, it's not a difficult decision on where to invest if you are looking to make him extra strong. Like with all signature Lycones, it is by no means required for him to have his signature in order for him to clear endgame content. If there's one thing I don't want you doing, it's swiping after watching this video based on what I say. That would make me sad, so please don't make me sad. But I also don't want to mislead you, so I will be honest in saying that if you do have the Stellar Jade savings for it, and you want Mydei to perform in the best way that he can, going for his signature is not a bad idea by any means. If you are interested in his other signature options, Blades is an obvious choice for its extra HP, high base HP, crit rate, and damage percent after being hit. So I'd say it's pretty clearly above his free-to-play options, with the only worry being the extra amount of crit rate, since the extra 18 coupled with using Sunday and RMC already puts Mydei's crit rate over 100, which is insane. Every other signature is kind of meh. Jingliu's could work if you use him with Castris, I guess, and Yunli's would seem like a great addition with its inherent taunt value, but the follow-up attack damage does nothing for Mydei, and he already has a guaranteed taunt from his technique and ultimate. Next, let's go over his teammate options. As will become the norm with my content cycle, a tier list video going over his teammates has already been released, so if you want a deeper dive into this topic, then there's that deeper dive. Here, I'll give the TLDR version if you just want the basics on who can be used with him. The basics is that you want units who can give him buffs that last multiple turns, while also advancing his turns so that he can further the mechanics of his gameplay, as more turns means more charging for his charge, more energy for his ultimate, and just generally more damage from acting more often. In this, the first team slot is a primary action advancer that's there to advance him as much as possible. Sunday is the best option by a good amount. The next best option is an E2 Bronya due to her speed boost letting him use HP boots in a -1 speed setup. If not her, then Sparkle is fine in a hypercarry speed setup, who is then lastly followed by a standard E0 Bronya. First as standards, Luocha is the best by a bit, but Gallagher is a very serviceable cheap option so long as the fight lets him keep his ultimate debuff up on the enemy. Linkshaw has pretty nice healing as well as an alternative, although I struggle to call her better than Gallagher here, thanks to his extra crit procs and better SP generation. Huohuo has by far the best offensive utility with her energy from her ultimate, but her healing can be a bit iffy. The thing is, you really want to put him in fights that really test his durability. So while Huohuo on paper is very optimal with him, in his optimal scenarios, she might be hard to play around. Below them, the likes of Bailu, Natasha, or Lynx are usable, kind of, but their healing is just rather lackluster compared to the above options. And finally, for the secondary support, every attack scaling support is a no-go. Pela, Jiaoshu, and Ranmei are all very usable, but generally the two options to use here are RMC or Tribi, with Tribi being marginally better than RMC, but RMC is not too far behind. So a cheap Mydei team would look like Mydei, RMC, Bronya, and Gallagher, where an expensive team would look like Mydei, Tribi, Sunday, and Luocha. The thing is, even his cheap team is for sure usable. This is not an Aglaya situation where her free-to-play team is hard to justify using, so even at a baseline he is pretty workable, before any of the other improvements that you can give him with whatever is on your account. You can also use him with Castris, but that's in the beta right now and is heavily subject to change. Just know that, right now, it looks workable, but not needed for either of them to perform well. It's more like a Blade-Jade relationship than anything else, if that makes sense. Finally, let's quickly go over his Eidolons, which are pretty underwhelming. His first one increases the multiplier of his extra enhanced skill by 30%, while also making that primary target scaling now hit all enemies on the field. This is a rather underwhelming first Eidolon, as while the extra enhanced skill is a large part of his damage, he is still primarily a blessed attacking carry for the vast majority of his attacks, so this isn't exactly giving him that much stronger of an AoE niche. The extra damage is there, but it's also just not as large as some other E1s. It is for sure a nice Eidolon to have for him, but it's pretty clear, at least to me, that they want to funnel people towards his S1 instead by making the choice between his E1 and S1 rather easy. His E2 gives him a 50% defense ignore while in his enhanced state, and also he receives 40% charge from every instance of healing. This is capped at 40 points of charge per instance, with this cap resetting after a unit takes action, meaning that you need to spread out your healing across your units or the enemy unit's turns to maximize your healing, instead of spam healing him all in one go. This is pretty easy to do with Luocha's field or Gallagher's debuff, but for the likes of, say, Linkshaw, it will require some pretty manual play with Fuyuan to give him as much charge as possible. For the Eidolon strength, it's decent. More charge and defense ignore are for sure very strong, but again, for the utterly absurd standards for an E2 that we've seen with other carries, this one is just really good, but not really great. His E4 gives him a 30% crit damage boost while in his enhanced state, and also, he restores 10% of his max HP whenever he is hit by an enemy. Firstly, this Eidolon works well with his second Eidolon, since the resetting for the healing instances is per unit action, whether that unit is an ally or an enemy. So every different enemy attacking will be giving him extra charge both by hitting him but also by healing him. Secondly, this great amount of extra healing also might help with Mydei going sustainless, but that's rather fight dependent on how much single target versus AoE target attacks there are to tank. A pretty decent Eidolon, but nothing game breaking. Finally, his E6 makes him instantly enter his enhanced state at the start of the fight, while also lowering the charge for his extra enhanced skill to 100. The entering of the enhanced state also immediately action advances him, so this is essentially a free extra turn for the first cycle or wave of the fight, which is pretty nice, but usually the second wave, at least in MOC, is the wave that is more demanding, so extra help on the first wave might not be too needed. The lower charge for the extra enhanced skill is pretty great when combined with the faster charging from his E2 and E4, so in his optimal fights that deal a lot of damage to him, his rate of extra enhanced skills will be massively increased. Still, as I've been saying, this E6 is rather tame compared to some of the other insane E6s. It's an increase in the rate of attacks rather than any game-breaking increase of his scalings or damage numbers. Obviously, the recommendation is to not spend for it, but if you are going all out on him, temper your expectations a bit when comparing him to other E6s. Alright, that's everything that I want to say for Mydei. Expect this content cycle to start for Castris when the beta cycle ends for 3.2. Until then, I'll have some other videos out going over more general Star Rail topics, so look out for those. And check out my stream if you want to see me live. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!